What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. I am joined by a good friend of mine, fraternity brother, FIU alumni, and immigration lawyer, Arturo Abreu. I said that properly,
You
right?
said that just right.
Okay, go, bro. Thank you so much for being with us here, bro. How are you?
Thank you for having me. Thank you again. I'm excited to get this going. I'm excited for what you're doing over here and
Yeah.
excited to get some content out there.
Hell yeah. Dude, you walked in here. Well, really, you went to go use the bathroom. I don't know where you was at, but I saw your legal notepad. Can you just show the people what we got?
Right here. We got some notes.
I was like, dude, you could tell this guy's a lawyer.
Typical lawyer. Once we spoke about doing this, I started right away doing some notes. I was like, I need to walk in, prepare, and having actual notes and facts and numbers, because a lot of times, especially today's day and age, a lot of people tend to use data and just kind of take it into another angle. So I wanted to make sure that we had the proper numbers and proper idea.
Were you always a meticulous person, or do you think law school kind of shaped you into being the way you are now?
I think 100% I was not. I was kind of always going with the flow. But I think once I got into law school and I became an attorney, I started understanding the perspective of you have to make sure that you get everything down packed and organized to make sure that you have the proper arguments whenever you say something. You can't just say something just because. You have to be able to back it up. So I think being organized and meticulous into what you're going to say is actually how you get the best delivered out there.
Right. And how was taking your LSAT? Do you think the LSAT actually prepares you for law school?
No. Actually, I don't even know why they have the LSAT. I think they should do another method of entry of exams. But that's, they need to have something. So I guess the LSAT is the best thing possible. But it was a horrible experience.
I took my LSAT and I got a 148. And then I'm like, damn, I spent a year on this.
Full disclosure, you did better than me.
¿De verdad?
I think I got like a 146 or something around that. But it was like 6-7 years ago. 8 years ago, something like that.
So Arturo, where does your story start? Where are you from, and how did you get into immigration law?
So so the story of my life, right? I was born in the Dominican. I lived there for about 10 years. And then my dad, he said he wanted a better future for us. He wanted a better life for us and my sister. And he one day said, hey, I think the U.S. is a good option for us. We had a company over there. So actually that starts tying down to how possibly I get into what I do nowadays. He has a company over there involved with tourism, and he brings a company over to Miami. So when we moved to Miami, a lot of his idea was to do tourism that goes from Miami to the Dominican Republic, which is known as one of the most touristic destinations in Latin America.
Super popular.
Right.
I think everybody, somebody that's been to Punta Cana.
Everyone. And the whole idea was, okay, we're going to bring people from Miami to Punta Cana. That was the idea. But when you're here, things change, and everything started changing. And then my dad started getting more involved. And then he started doing a lot of law. He got hired by an attorney to do what's called like contractual work, because he did have some experience with doing business capacities and all that stuff. So he started doing that for an immigration lawyer. So that's where it started kind of tying in. I used to see this every day. That was a foot in the door. I used to watch it. Growing up, all I would hear my dad is talk about cases and immigration and things, and then I started seeing a new world of, okay, this is, I'm passionate. I'm listening. I'm 12
and you identify with it. You yourself were an immigrant.
Yeah, exactly. And we went through a process, L1, L2 visa process, which we ultimately got approved. And then we saw the complexity. I mean, people have this understanding that immigration laws are, simple, or they don't know anything because they were born here. But I can tell you firsthand, immigration laws are extremely complex or extremely difficult. Yeah. And it's not as easy as, okay, you have this and you qualify. It's just, there's a lot of complexities and nuances within immigration law.
Got you. And now, so what would you say was like a defining moment where you're like, okay, I wanna do this, or did you go into law school like, maybe I want to do a different kind of law, or
no? So what happened was that when I was sometime around college time, I think it was like my second year.
When you were throwing up triangles,
right? When I was throwing up triangles with Teague, when I was doing all the fun stuff, I've always been fluent in both English and Spanish, very fluent. So they said, okay, have a little gig for me. Do you want to go interpret, to go as an interpreter for some clients to USCIS? And I was like, Of course. Like,
Now,
are you
is
kidding me?
UCIS is the immigration court? Or?
Yeah, no, it's the immigration. So the Department of Homeland Security after
9/11?
9/11
Yeah.
created several branches under the Homeland Security, and one of them was USCIS, which is oversees immigration processes, and it's usually the first on. You're talking about family petitions and when they schedule interviews, it's all that is with USCIS.
So that's the office that handles kind of like the onboarding, so to speak, of the immigrants.
That's correct. And then you have the immigration courts, which is once a case gets denied or there's an issue going on, they usually go to immigration court. That's completely
So like
different.
if UCIS is like, we deny your application, you could go to the court and appeal it and be like, nah, they made a mistake.
Right. And you go and fight in front of a judge. That you do in immigration court. USCIS, you go in front of an officer. So that's
is that expensive? After that, so is the strategy making sure you pass the UCIS so that you never have to touch immigration court?
Yeah, it's
that's the way to go, I imagine.
It definitely is. And immigration is expensive. Migrating is expensive. Hiring lawyers or using process, which a lot of people here do with notarios, paralegals, that's expensive. So fees are expensive. So immigration, migrating and getting your proper documentation is generally expensive. And especially if your case goes down the south route, which is it has to go to court and you don't have a strong case, you're going to spend a lot of money and sometimes you don't even get adjudicated. So you lose status or you're having to fight back with the system.
So I guess my next question really is focused on where is the United States' immigration process? Like, can you just tell us a little bit about majority of my viewership is Hispanic because, you know, we're here in Miami, but obviously immigration affects everybody of all countries, right? The United States has a way of going about it. What are your thoughts on it? Is it an effective system? Can it be improved? Where do you think the biggest issues are in the legal immigration process?
So a lot of good points. And I think immigration is actually migrating to the U.S. is very difficult. I mean, extremely difficult because I was just talking about the expenses that there is. But there's a lot of unfair, what I like to can say, unfair laws favoring some countries versus others. And there's some unfair laws favoring some processes over some others. For example, marriage-based petitions. I mean, sometimes some of these processes are getting approved within 2 to 3 months without an interview.
While other processes take longer and you need an interview.
Right. So then you also have, I'll contrast that to, for example, someone who wants to come invest e-process or someone who wants to come bring a business to the U.S. They make it so difficult. And sometimes I'm like, it's even unfair. And then sometimes you're like, okay, which one is more important, right? Because you do have a marriage-based petition, right? But in the other one, you have people who are trying to come to the U.S. to invest and bring business and bring money.
Or like to buy property or bring some economic.
Exactly, which is what America stands for, right?
Right, of course.
So why is it that one is faster than the other one? Yeah, we understand that there's reunification of families and you want to, that's always the most important thing. But I think we should give more, and my opinion has always been, always favor growth to the country and what would be within the national interest, what would be within this country's interest. And it's always favoring the economy. And it's always bringing immigrants who are going to favor us, and that's where I think it comes in because we need immigration. Yes or no, we need immigration.
No, this country was built on immigrants. The whole purpose of America was you're going to take people all over the world and we're going to live together under these values that the Constitution sets out. Right. So todo el mundo aquí vino en un barco, vino por avión, vino de otro lugar.
Anywhere, one way or another, everyone made it. Everyone made it, and everyone that you've met had a family member who was here, who was there, who was able to help them. But I feel like if you want to actually improve a system, you first improve the system from the inside out. So in this case, fix the individuals who are already here. You make it, you put your regulations in place, but you give priority to people who want to actually improve the country, because there are processes that favors professionals and workers and what, companies need. And then sometimes those get tainted by people who are trying to cross the borders, criminals, and that's the other fight, right? That's unfortunately the ones that we see on TV are the ones who cross the border, the ones who are committing the crimes, and we don't highlight enough the ones who are making discoveries, the ones who are going to school, the ones who are becoming doctors, lawyers, you know, the ones who are doing things in this country.
And then immigration overall just kind of gets like this stigma of like you stepping on my stuff and you don't even belong here.
Right.
Or there are people who have legitimate desires and it could actually help the United States, because I think now when you kind of attach the whole Republican versus Democrat spin on the border crisis, which as of recording this is the number one issue going into the 2024 elections, right? It's framed almost like they're coming here, taking all of our resources, and we're giving up all of our taxpayer money to people who don't even pay taxes, and we don't even know who they are, which in instances can be true.
Right.
But I get what you're saying, that we don't highlight at all the legal immigration of people who are actually contributing to our society.
Right. And there's the statistics out there about over 25% of immigrants that come to the United States they create their own businesses. Like they do their own, they create their small business owners. That's a very large percentage. I mean, you're talking about 25% of the population that's creating jobs for other people. And maybe going into the other route as to why it's being weaponized as a political agenda. Remember that, like, there's some people who don't have an interest in having immigration laws be regulated. To some people, it is convenient to have an issue at the border. To some people, it is convenient to have laws not passed. To some people, it is convenient to have undocumented people.
Name drop them, bro.
You know, if we
who are these people?
Who are these people? You know, think about the people lobbying for things. So think about, for example, in the construction sector.
Of course,
if you were to legalize all these individuals, which data is showing somewhere between 11 to 12 undocumented, not 18 as Twitter was claiming the other day. So
just go back. 11 to 12 meaning percent
undocumented. Individuals. 11 to 12 million undocumented.
Okay.
Right, which has been fairly across. It's been consistent for the past about 20 years. It's been somewhere between 13 and 14.
Like right now in the United States.
Right now in the United States. The problem is a lot of people have been adjudicated. A lot of people have been able to do processes. There's a lot of TPS and a lot of people on political asylum. So, so
what you're saying is the number of illegal immigrants has stayed about the same, because obviously some illegal immigrants become legal. Right. Some people leave. And then obviously new people come in. So that number is roughly 11 to 12.
Right. That's the number that the consensus has been showing steady. And, you know, going back to the political issue, if you legalize all of these individuals, now you not only have to give them proper documentation, but you have to give them proper wages. And obviously when you do that, now you create a market that is not as favorable for these type of constructions, agriculture, business, all these type of industries that need and live off of undocumented immigration. So I don't think it's always, and we were talking about it earlier, it's always a topic that becomes a larger topic when elections years come around, because we're trying to see where are the solutions. Everybody knows the solution. Everybody knows how we can solve it, but nobody really wants to take a step and say, okay, let's legalize everyone here, and then we can recreate some laws that can actually work. It seems to be like there's the issue that nobody wants to address, but just wants to talk about. And
that brings such an interesting point, because it's funny, because my lady always gets annoyed at 8 a.m. when I say, Alexa, play the news. Right. So and every day they talk about the border crisis. And one of these things, I think it was last week, they were mentioning because I listen to Fox and CNN. I try to get it from both. So on CNN they were like, the Republicans don't care about the border. They just want to use it as a way to advance, like, oh, mira que yo hice. Right. Like, oh, mira que yo resolví para ustedes. So I guess that kind of goes to your point of like, in these election years, it's not about solving the issue. It's about gaining a chip, gaining one up on the other party, so to speak. So how do you think we got into this border
Border
crisis situation,
Okay.
right? Like,
Right.
how did we get here from where we were? Obviously, illegal immigration has always happened,
Always.
but we are seeing
Mhm.
it just dramatically increase over the past 2 years. Is it Biden's fault? Was it Trump's fault? Is it neither of their faults? Or is it just the world's fault?
I actually want to say that it's both of them. Both of them, they're both at issue here because. So I want to trace back to when the pandemic came around, right? That was 2020. Everybody went into chaos, and really we didn't know what was going on, and countries were all going on lockdown, and remember, here some states had lockdowns, some did not,
Claro.
but Latin American countries, almost every country was locked down. You couldn't leave. I mean, there was countries that were shut down for months and even up to a year. So going back to what happened in 2020 when the borders shut down, the first thing that was passed was Title 42, which is a big thing that occurred, which it was codified as or named as a stay in Mexico law. So what that meant is that if someone came to the border or there was an encounter with someone and they wanted to request asylum, they would allow them to do the asylum, but they had to wait in Mexico. So, and this wasn't just one or two. This was over 2.4 million individuals within a span of 3 years that came to the border.
That claimed Title 42.
That claimed asylum and were held in Mexico under the laws of Title 42. Because this was basically a law that was passed, like a treaty that was passed between the U.S. and Mexico in order to keep individuals there in Mexico. So obviously the president, López Obrador, was really happy because he knew he was getting funding from the U.S. And at that point, he kind of just shook hands with both Trump and Biden because Biden never took the Title 42. He just kind of let it expire once it was late 2023. So if you see,
so real quick, so you're saying that once Biden comes into power, Title 42 is still enacted.
It was still active. Right?
It was still active. So, but from my view, there was still this catch and release while Title 42 was still enacted?
Yeah.
Or was now this catch and release once it expired?
No. So it happened in 2020. And then at the end of 2023, there was still people coming, but there was a lot of people that were not getting, what do you call them, crossing over without getting checked and all that. So those numbers started going up because you have all these people mounted here, 2.4, 2.5 million approximately. And a lot of them were just getting desperate at that point. They're like, we need to start crossing. But the problem is that if you crossed and you did it illegally and you were caught after you had requested asylum, you'd be disqualified. So
you get to the border. Hey, I'm seeking asylum. Perfect. Stay in Mexico. Wait for your court date. But en el desespero, which many of the, understandably, because these people are coming to the border for many, many reasons. So I don't even want to get into like the why that is the case. But, and I get you. Then they make the decision, okay, we're just going to get into the United States illegally. They get caught at that point. Their asylum seeking is revoked. They're disqualified.
Because it's illegal, technically, and under immigration laws, it's illegal to cross over. So it's already considered a crime under immigration law to cross undocumented, because that would be crossing undocumented. Your process.
But if you never claimed asylum and you crossed and then they caught you, what happens there?
So then at that point, once you're there, you can claim asylum at that point. So, and a lot of people were not getting turned over. They were being held in the immigration centers, detention centers. So depending, for example, on the country, a lot of them were getting paroled or they were just let go. And then, because you got to remember, you're dealing with a federal entity that is understaffed. They're dealing with hundreds of thousands of people that are near the border. And it was hard to track everything and everyone coming, but at the same time, I felt like the best, they're doing the best they can, but there's also another factor which I've always said, and I've been cautious about saying this one. But and I like to point, and I always make an analogy, and going back to, I like to make it seem like you have to look at the analogy as like this is a club that has a lot of people outside, right? And when you look at it from the outside, it looks very attractive. So when you see that, a lot of people want to keep coming. So they're seeing videos, they're seeing all this on social media. A lot of people, it's getting easier. It's not that it's getting easier to come into the border. It's just there's a lot of people. And, you know, aside from the lobbyists and all these people we're talking about, you know who else really, who else really enjoys there being a chaos at the border? The narcos. I mean, you're talking about the people in the...
Claro, que ellos se aprovechan de todo eso.
Of course. I mean, these are the people, and look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I really am.
No, everybody that's sat in this chair has got to drop a conspiracy. My boy Javi out here went crazy with the conspiracy.
No, but you see, there's a thing, because how do you, and look, and I'm talking about people, now, before it was just Central Americans, now you have Chinese people.
People from Sri Lanka, people from Africa. How did they get there?
How did they get there? So a lot of course. So look, the numbers from crossing the Darien, which is one of the most dangerous paths you can ever go through, because of how, you know, there's a lot of, and I have to watch with what I say here, but there's a lot of crimes against humans that occur within the Darien, and it's very dangerous. They noted last year there was over 500,000 people that cross the Darien, which is extremely dangerous. And from the time you cross the Darien, you're just crossing into Central America, which that's another trajectory that you have to get all the way to Guatemala, then cross to Mexico, and then go all the way up to Mexico to either Tijuana or Baja California or one of those points. So it's not, and it's very expensive. So I'm always thinking these are typically, you know, middle to low class. How can they afford to do this?
El extranjero. At the end of the day, much how my family has tried, my partner's tia came through a similar thing. The family pitched together so that we could make the $10,000 to go give it to the coyote.
Right.
And we're going to be sending you pictures along the way because and that's the thing. Like, it has created a whole black market economy of human trafficking.
Right.
Whether it's for good reasons or bad reasons. And America can't distinguish the reason. So just kind of going back to Title 42, but I got to say this because this has been on the forefront of your club analogy.
Yeah.
You ready?
Right, go for it.
How you hating from outside of the club?
You can't even get in. And this is the right proper response to anyone who ever says, "Hey, the U.S. is I don't see crowds of people trying to get into your country." You know, whoever is trying to say that before they say that, because one thing that I have unequivocally always said is that I love this country and I've loved the opportunity that I've had giving and the responsibility that I have every day to help people. But aside from that, it's true. Like, you can't hate from outside. And look, Mexico has done a lot, but I think the issue, if we were to solve more, if we were to get like, okay, how do you really fix border issues? Okay, let's go down south. Let's go more of Mexico and Guatemala, for example. Let's go El Salvador and Guatemala. Let's focus on Panama and Colombia, where the Darien
before they even get there,
right?
Because all of them start in South America and Colombia, work their way up Central America. Dude, as you know, I travel a lot for work and stuff, so I've sat next to, coming from Phoenix, a gentleman that literally got released. Yo estoy hablando de un cubano. And, you know, we got together because he heard my accent. I heard his accent, so we hit it off. And he's talking about, de Cuba, yo tomé un vuelo para Cancún, me quedé en México por un mes, y hasta que crucé la frontera.
I've heard that story so many times.
You know what I mean?
So many times. And it's like, and it's a tough journey. Like, it's not an easy journey. And
that takes months at times.
But I'll take it a step. China. Like, you have people coming from China all the way to like Ecuador and Colombia, and then they start coming up. And I'm like, guys, like, and I get it. So another factor as to why this is also happening is that after the pandemic, the U.S. government became a lot more stingy with giving visas. So it's not that people weren't coming and overstaying. People always came and overstayed. People have always done this where they came in as a tourist and stayed. The problem is that now, since they were becoming a lot more stingy with the visas, they said, okay, the only option that we have is when we come in through borders. So they said, okay, we're just going to go straight to a country like a Mexico or like a, you know, Central America or like a Colombia, and then we're going to start migrating up. And that's also what's added to the 2.4 million people who were at the border, the marching caravans and all that stuff. But again, tracing back, that always looks like a political agenda. It always looks good for the Republicans to say, hey, we have a crisis, we need to solve this, or for the Democrats to say, look, we, here are the numbers, we've done this, we've done that, we've done the other. So I give credit and I take credit away from both. Always. I try to be, because
not one or the other can say we have the whole solutions and it's not all my mistake either.
I agree, because this is an issue that's been happening forever. I mean, this was an issue that was happening in the 90s, and there was an amnesty passed, and with Reagan. This was an issue that happened in 2000. Well, after 9/11. It's always been an issue. So
damn. Our fraternity brother couldn't solve it.
No. We couldn't. But there are solutions, man. Look. Reagan, I thought, was the one guy who actually, mind you, because the way that immigration was viewed back in the 80s and late 80s and early 90s was completely different to how it's viewed now. Like before, I would say the Republicans were more in favor of passing laws to kind of legalize everyone, because they actually did. And I remember there's a famous one about George H. Bush. Father, senior, speaking about how we need immigration. Like, this is Republicans, they would likely not say that, even if they want to, they likely won't say that. But for example, Marco Rubio, not too long ago, was part of the Gang 8, which he was trying to pass immigration amnesty. That was like about 10 years ago. So there's always, I don't like to think that, Democrats are the only ones in favor of immigration. That's not true. And I think there's some Democrats that have had power and have not been able to do much. And I'll now flip it out to the other side. Who was the president who deported the most people? Obama. Obama deported the most people. And who was his VP? And who was his VP?
Hold on. Hey, right. Check these boys.
So his administration deported the most. Of course, you have to say Trump, what he did was enforce the laws more.
Yeah, like, he definitely said to everybody, like, hey, look, we're going to uphold what we know is the right policy.
Oh, yeah. And there was fear.
And we're going to police it.
When Trump got elected, and I'm telling you, there was a shift in the immigration laws, and there was fear. There was just a lot of cases were getting denied, and a lot of cases, it was tougher. It really was. I'll admit it. And sometimes when things get tougher, they could be good for certain things and bad for certain others.
Double-edged sword.
Double-edged sword.
So, Arturo, real quick. So, are you in favor of Title 42?
Look, at this point, I would have liked Title 42 to have been expanded all over Central America, not just stay in Mexico.
Stay wherever you're from.
Right. Stay wherever you were from. Like, stay somewhere else. It would have been, or let's just say, for example, if your purpose to come to the U.S., if we would have had more control of other Central American countries, we wouldn't have been in this current issue that we're on now. Like, this is the reason. It's like a cause and effect. Like, they saw the headache that was happening, and they were just kind of ignoring it. And now it kind of and it's kind of blowing up in their face. And look, Mallorca, he's he
got kicked out.
Yeah, but Mallorca, he's taking all the heat. But I think he's actually trying. He's not like just looking the other way.
That's a refreshing take, because you're coming off as, you're very America first,
right? Which
is obviously a very Republican sentiment now. Right. But you have no issue being like, los republicanos cagaron aquí.
Yeah, no.
Se cagaron aquí.
Exacto. Because I think también is that you have to remember, especially and the first ones sometimes to come and be loud about unfairness on immigration laws are the ones who have received benefits, are the ones who have had immigration benefits.
That's where Cubans come in, and
I'm not gonna say who, but they're always the loudest. That. They're always the loudest, and I understand because they have the sentiment of patriotism. I do too, and I want the best for the U.S. always. My focus mostly is helping legal people do the right process. Not once you are undocumented, it's really hard to get some type of legal process. And again, going back to what is it that they do, a lot of times when they come through the borders, or the only recourse that they really go for is an asylum, which it's creating also a backlog. Now there's so let's say, for example, somebody crosses the border and they request asylum. For an asylum hearing, roughly
Months to a year.
9 years to get in front. Like, you can get into with an officer, but to get your case heard in front of a judge, you're talking about eight. I have cases that have been held for 8-9 years.
So
8 and 9 years.
So your unborn son would be in the 5th grade by the time that your client.
Which that
What?
it doesn't make sense. So that's part of
The problem.
And then why do people request asylum? Well, asylum is not a legal status. It kind of puts you in a limbo, right? Because when you request asylum, you can't leave the US. You forfeit the asylum. And what the benefit about requesting asylum is that you get a work permit, so you have work authorization.
Okay.
So you can start working.
So those that are asylum seeking still pay taxes, they contribute, pero también le dan beneficio.
Yeah. It's just once they have work authorization, yes, because I want to make a difference between someone who requested asylum and has a work permit. They're not considered illegal immigrants. Mm-hmm. Illegal immigrants, someone who came in through the border, wasn't checked, or someone who overstayed his visa process. That's an illegal. Those are the 11 million or so individuals that we're counting. Those now. These are benefiting. The other ones are also benefiting because a lot of times for them to work, they can't legally get paid. They don't have a social security number. Or if they have, they don't have a work authorization because sometimes they were legal and then lost status. But a lot of times they're paid through a company and their taxes are withheld. But there is always benefit. There's more benefit in immigration than burden overall. The big picture. When they get into the whole taxes and does it benefit, does it not? The bigger numbers have shown that it's more beneficial than not to have immigration, because also the other aspect, the labor and the other,
growing your economy, the small business generation,
economy,
and also just helping out the other businesses.
Right. And maybe also another tweak that I keep trying to bring up is another reason why we actually need immigration is because birth rates are so low. I mean, this is the lowest birth. We have, our generation has the lowest birth rates ever. I think it's like 1.8 or something super low. Mm-hmm. And if you're considering boomers being the largest generation, they're gonna start dying, or it's going to start dying. And then we have us who are not having children. You're going to have a decrease in the population. And when you have a steady decrease in population, that also affects your economy, which is something that
and now the GDP is going to shrink, and now it's not going to. So I get what you're saying. Like, immigration's always been a central part of the American story. We need it. And now going kind of back to the court system and how backlogged it is, mm-hmm. would it not be a more effective solution to just have Congress put way more resources into getting through that backlog? Because I get what you're saying. Like, mm-hmm. we have a process. Mm-hmm. It's a good process, but it's a slow process.
Mm-hmm. It's the toughest question that I think it's so going back to the resources.
Porque es la póliza, pero que se demora mucho. Or is it that the policies just suck and we need to do a different? I guess that's what I'm asking you, right? Like, what's a preferable solution?
I think the policies just suck and we just need to come up with something different.
Because the staying in court 9 years, this shit ain't working.
Right, and here's the other thing: we go to court, your case gets adjudicated. Like, you have to go. You're getting deported. It's not like somebody takes you to the plane right there. They tell you, a lot of people get put into this like ICE, what's called the ICE watch list. So they put them, so they have to report to ICE, and they get put.
It's almost like a parole officer kind of.
Yeah, they get put in order of deportation. And then they have to show up once a year, and a lot of those people go like 20 years in that. And so you're like, hold on, you came in asylum, you even had your hearings, your case was dismissed. You're in deportation order, but they're not deporting you. you're just still going, because there's
I get you, like immigration limbo. Like you just don't know. They haven't really given you something definitive. And at that point, you're going all this time. You're not a citizen. You don't have a U.S. passport. You're not enjoying the benefits of the citizen.
Right.
But you've already metido 20 años contribuyendo.
You're a doctor. You're a lawyer. You have family here. You have your whole. I mean, I have friends, that they've been here 20 years and they're in the immigration limbo. And now, of course, like when you start learning the process, you kind of know, okay, how you can solve those issues now and get them back. But the situation is that once you get put in that limbo, it is so hard to come back. So these individuals, especially when DACA came around, and because DACA were classmates. A lot of classmates that I had were DACA students. And when DACA was
right, like your parents were illegal, but you were born here.
Oh no! With DACA, what happened is that you were brought when you were a little kid. So your parents brought you here. They lost status. You were in school. You were 7, 8 years old.
Yeah. You
graduated high school, and you're like, okay, so what do I do now? All these students, all these individuals who were kind of just in the limbo. So the Obama administration passed DACA, which is deferred action for students, dreamers, what they call dreamers. And that was a big, everybody loved dreamers.
I recall that being mad controversial.
Yeah.
Like we were about to take, especially when we went to FIU,
Right. And that's what I had a lot of friends and classmates that were dreamers. And like they had a chance to go to school because they were dreamers, because they were able to get a work authorization or the Social Security travel permits. So then they were able to go to school like everybody. They did life just like everyone. And then they find out, like, hey, I really have this issue with immigration. I'm a dreamer. But then the Dream Act, the dreamer process, then it went to, Supreme Court. That's when they had all the issues. They weren't trying to determine if it was legal, if Obama overreached his powers. In that situation, the chaos is that you legalized or you gave status to a group of individuals, and then you basically removed it. So, Obama, you can say anything you want, but when it came to the Constitution, Obama knew what he had to do because he was actually...
Obama's a lawyer.
Yeah, he taught constitutional law. So when you have a guy like that, he knows, okay, he might have overreached, depending on what view you want to take on that, how you want to approach that in the literal sense. But then Obama left, and he kind of left that there. Okay, you guys legalized them. They're illegal now, so you can't just go and deport them, right? Because you've already given them work permits. So then that issue came in, that limbo of like, you're not sure what
once you give somebody something, how are you gonna tener la cara to take it away?
Yeah, that's
fucked up.
That was the problem, man. That was a problem, man. And honestly, I want to say that, in fairness, Obama knew what he was doing. He also, another thing that he did.
You think he set it up?
Yeah, no.
You think that boy set it up?
Man, that boy was too smart, and we had no idea. Another thing that he did, and I don't know if you noticed, but that was at the end. Like it was like the last one.
Cuando le quitó the wet foot, dry foot.
Yeah, wet foot, dry foot.
Eso dolió un poquito.
Of course.
Because we Cubans love our special privileges.
Of course, man. And he said, because obviously he knows the minute that minute that Cuban steps foot, it's like,
it's dry.
Yeah.
And
then it's like you vote for Republicans and everyone is a comunista. You know how it goes.
Of course.
So they know that, and they understood that that there was also individuals that were coming in, taking advantage of the process. They would stay here, they would adjudicate under the Cuban Adjustment Act, and they would go back to Cuba. So they knew that was happening. And they said, wow, we need to find some type of a fairness solution here, because a lot of other countries also needed help. So as soon as he was walking, I think it was one of the last.
Literally, no, it was like Trump goes in, it's not dry no more.
Boom. But you know what? Trump never did anything about it.
Yeah.
He just left it there. So he could have changed something.
And Cubans will die for Trump.
Oh, yeah. Of course. They love him. And I understand why. I understand how he's appealed a lot to the crowd.
Can we just real quick talk a little bit about immigration and Cubans? and I have to bring up the Elian story.
Gonzalez, yeah.
So again, like in 2000, I'm 4 years old. So,
Right.
I hear.
I wasn't even in America. So.
Yeah. So
Right.
I'm hearing all about the alien stuff,
Mhm.
and it really is tough as a very, very Cuban person with a lot of pride. But from the American perspective, you had to send that boy back.
Look, and of course, because also you're technically family, the one who had custody and the one who had everything
Cuba,
was the father,
reclamando.
right? The father. But that became a political issue because guess what happened in
Super.
2020? That was election
Clinton.
year.
Yeah.
And that's what. So funny enough, because I was talking about JC Planas, we had a class with him, and one of the last classes, to me, one of the best classes I've had. That I've enjoyed. He actually brought the lawyers that argued, the Gore Bush, and some of the issues that were tied down as to why there was a lot of Cuban animosity towards Gore was because of the Elian Gonzalez.
Because of Democrats, Cubans historically, and we're not going to go back to
they were mad.
There's a whole podcast that can be done about why Cubans don't like Democrats.
Yeah,
but that is one emotional one.
They were.
You have to understand, this young boy is immigrating on a raft with 8 other people. 7 out of the 8 people die. He washes on Key West. I was it Thanksgiving or Christmas Day?
It was a holiday.
It was a holiday. I think it was Christmas. And los cubanos se dieron, ay, like we got all like the, la Virgen de la Caridad gold, all that imagery of Cubans. They're like, este niño está bendecido por Dios. There's no way. And Cubans really resonate with he left, his family left to escape persecution or seeking asylum. Right. And from the American perspective, you came here illegally. You have a father back in your home country reclamándote. Why would we put you with somebody who's not even your kin?
Yeah.
And that got super politicized.
Which turns into a human rights issue because now you're not dealing with international law. Now you're dealing with international law, which is who has custody over the child. And obviously the father did. And I think the general population was not, they did not want to hear the truth. No. They were like, no, this is who was it? Clinton is being soft, and was it Janet Reno? I think she was.
It was the lady.
And then it was like Janet Reno, Gore, and they were doing like figuritas and everything about them, and they did remember. I mean, I'm telling you because I think the Elian Gonzalez might have had a lot of pressure because they came down to that 530 something votes.
One of the people that I work with at the time was. He's a little older now, but he was literally working in that office during that campaign.
Chaos.
on the Gore side, and he's even in the Fahrenheit 535, like because that was all here in Miami. All of that shit happened in Miami.
Everything happened in downtown Miami. It was between downtown and Brickell, and you could see the videos. And you're like, I've seen this, and you see and these same lawyers that argued this case, they came to our class, and I was like. I'm witnessing it, To me, this is greatness.
Nerdy shit.
It's like when basketball players see LeBron. I'm like, this is like watching LeBron.
Top tier lawyers coming out here.
The 2 guys, and obviously 20 years later, and these guys are still like, I was right about this. And
the boys are still on that.
Man, they're salty. And look, I have my conspiracy when it comes to that election. I think, there was a lot of favoritism. Because obviously you had the governor and the state. It came down to a close call. I thought, honestly, at that point, both of them were great candidates. It came down to very narrow issues. Even the country was very narrow on that. At that time, obviously, I was very young, but I can tell you that maybe and that's how you could tell immigration can affect even elections at a large scale, like that whole issue with Elian. And I'm telling you, this whole border issue
is going to keep inflaming and enraging. And the way how these 2 really old dudes talk about the immigration policies will dictate how people come. So, te voy a decir una cosa. From a national scale, because obviously the border crisis is a national issue that we feel here locally. I can tell you when I was in Arizona that, in my opinion, is one of the most purple states I've ever been. Like, dude, I'm talking about, I'll knock on one door and it is hardened Republicans, MAGA, I got guns, I'm here dipping, spitting right here. Y la otra, it's like liberal city and they're neighbors.
Right. And they get along. Because the idea, you know what's the narrative that a lot of these or politics nowadays, like they want to divide. They're like, you have these views and I have these views and we're not friends. But in Arizona, you probably saw they're next door neighbors and they get along just fine. They just vote differently. You know, that's the only 100%. Thing. They just have a different idea of voting. I've
always said that most Americans, I would say like honestly like 95% of the voting class people, we believe in the same exact thing.
Moderates.
We just disagree on how we get there.
Moderates.
You might say less, not even moderate. Like most people will agree that people should be safe. We all have a right to be happy, and we can all avanzar.
Right.
That's not a Republican.
Happiness,
dude. Right? That's not Republican and Democrat. The only thing is that the Republican says, "Government, stay out of my way. Let me do me." Right. And the Democrats like, "No, let's help them out.
Let's help them out." Right.
But at the end of the day, everybody wants to be happy.
And then they labeled one as socialist, and then they labeled the other.
It's just how we get there.
Like with the whole
but
guns.
I definitely think that this immigration issue moving forward is only going to be intensified.
Yeah.
Y te voy a decir una cosa. And this is now I want to get into some anecdotes about the illegal immigration. Bro, it's just such a tough issue because when you see on the news, mujer was violently attacked by 7 Venezuelan illegal immigrants.
It's a tough
thing. ¿Tú me entiendes? Like the optics of it.
Right. It's a tough thing because it's once something happens, and you can see that in other countries too. You know, you get, for example, in Colombia, you will see, a Venezuelan did something, and it's like magnified over the 250,000 ones that are there, hardworking individuals. But then that one bad one labels it. It's like one bad apple spoils everyone, right? So that's always the tough part because, I mean, obviously you can't regulate how individuals behave. You just regulate the process. And every time something happens, and I've seen these videos too. Remember, these are things that not that they didn't happen before. It's just now things are being recorded. We see them live, but you see people and how they are and for the true color. So you can persuade and dissuade through the media how the story and the narrative, like, look, I'm giving them free housing and therefore look how they're behaving and how are we allowing this, and this is Biden's fault. Automatically, it's like, boom. I'm like, how can Biden control the behavior of an individual? Like, hold on, like, we got to pump the brakes on that. But I do agree that if you are going to come to this country, you have to do the right thing. You have to behave. You have to obey by the laws. And you have to, know that this country is a country of law and order. Like, you can't come here with the behavior maybe that you had in your country and expect, that it's going to be the same result.
That's going to slide.
No, it's not. Like, this is one thing that I love about America is law and order actually works and is proper. And, there's a lot of, it actually works. It's a system that actually works. Thankfully.
Yeah. Let's get into the numbers, bro. What is the cost of illegal immigration? Like, is there a way to say this one person that came here illegally was worth this amount of dollars? Or is it more like, hey, we've had this group of people, so because of it, we'll never be able to realize certain gains or certain things?
Right. So speaking about numbers and if it's beneficial or not, so a study in 2019 brought numbers that the illegal immigration, so this just focusing on illegal immigration, brought up about over $322 billion in GDP growth. So that's actually a very good number. Remember, illegal immigrants do pay taxes, do pay sales taxes, do they benefit the economy in that way, and they cannot claim certain benefits. I mean, their kids under constitutional rights, under constitutional law, they can they have public education, and they do have the only type of medical care that they could get is when they go to an ER emergency room, because that's also a constitutional right. But aside from that, really, in terms of cost and monetarily, it's tough to gauge, because a lot of times what's happening is they'll deem a household, there's illegal immigrants, right? There could be 2, and then the 2 kids are U.S. born. So now the whole household is considered undocumented or
I got you.
illegal.
Like, it's very hard to really track what is the real impact. We know there's an impact,
Right. And if you look at it, obviously they are working, they are helping out, they are bringing plus to the economy. And I think there's the idea that one or two bad apples, and I've seen the videos too, and I know you've seen it where people are like, "Oh, look what I'm doing. You know, this country is giving me all these benefits." So going back to what we've seen in the housing things, this country has a lot of money, like the U.S. does, and the U.S. offers free housing to individuals, to homeless people. It offers, you see homeless people, but most of the times what happens is that they are electing not to take the benefits. They don't go to these free housing things. And then there's always been free housing out of Korea. I don't know if you remember the videos, and everyone saw the movie Scarface.
Yeah, of course.
Remember El Mariel, right? El Mariel. Remember when the scene when he arrives to Miami and there's like all these tented houses. That's actually an example of housing. That was a lot of people lived in these tents for years and for months and years because they're trying to relocate. They're trying to get united with their family. They have to get processed. So that's a prime example of free housing being given. Obviously, there was people who you didn't want back then, but you, for example, before you didn't have a camera to record and todo eso. So a lot of that happens. Nowadays. It's just now it's being recorded. Now you have, unfortunately, you have people that were raised in systems that they think that it's the same in the U.S. and they hit the reality.
So where do you see this border crisis ending? Because we're in the middle of it.
Right.
How do you see this winding down? Do you think this is like you have to have like a super hard stop? If Trump wins the elections, do you think the border crisis stops? Or like where do you see this headed?
So, and it's funny and interesting because I haven't heard the whole let's build the wall thing as I used to in 2016 and 2020, which is, I don't know why I'm not hearing it because it was a very popular thing, but I think we realized that it's too expensive and that nobody wants to pay for it, right? So what's the solution to this, right? I think once the election comes around, because right now it's being weaponized as a political agenda and used for political purposes. Once elections happen, I think there'll be a more concrete focus by Congress to say, okay, we've been elected, we didn't get elected, Biden stayed or Trump comes back. Now we have to solve this. The pressure is always on who is on, always. So I'll give some credit to Trump. When he was on, USCIS laws were strict. And I'll give some credit to Biden because he has done a lot for individuals from Venezuelans with the TPS. To me, that was a big surprise. The TPS came overnight, and the humanitarian paroles. So they're actively trying, and there's this concept, and I'm sorry because I have to say this, but people are like, oh, but you're getting undocumented people to vote. I'm like, hold on, guys. They don't even have an ID. Like, no, it's not happening. Stop listening to that. It's not true. You cannot vote. Your vote won't count. If that's true, that we know voting commission. We've seen how the balloting and all that stuff works. You can't just show up with like a driver license from Venezuela or from Colombia and be like, hey, I'm going to vote. It doesn't work like that. So let's pump the brakes on that. I think the
implication on the super far right folks is that because you gave them all of, and to me, it honestly sounds more of a complaint, so to speak. But it's the logic of, well, if Biden gave you all these benefits and all these stuff, you're going to stay loyal to that party. Right. So he, so to speak, is importing his votes. Right. Not now. Right. But later.
Working towards the future. But you'd be surprised. And you'd be surprised how much more a Hispanic population has already shifted towards a more what I consider centric view. Like they vote based on issues and not based on a party. I want to say that this is possibly within the minorities, within especially Hispanics. They've gone more into the Republican, more into the conservative side, and we see it every day. I mean, especially here in Florida, right? Because we're in Florida, but there's a larger number of conservatives, Hispanics, especially because there's a whole movimiento de la izquierda and all that stuff in Latin America.
In Latin America with Milei, with Bukele, with all these guys, it's a revival of that conservative movement sentiment. Right. But in the instance of Argentina, when you had the craziest inflations and
Mhm.
all those
Or
super
the
liberal policies, that
Fernandez.
people se quedaron like, what's going on?
Right.
And then in El Salvador, when you had the whole thing of all the criminals and all the
Mhm.
gangs where we couldn't even live,
Right. And now it's like
and he's
the
the
safest.
he is, bro.
He
To win an election by 85%,
85%.
that's crazy. That's a blowout.
When I
That's
saw
a
that,
blowout.
I was like, okay.
Top
and,
G.
And I'll tell you this. A lot of times, what a lot of Republicans think of Trump, they're like, this is our top G. But
Nah, Bukele's top
but
G.
right, Bukele's top G, and you know, like for example, I'm seeing a lot of the one from Ecuador, Novoa.
Mhm.
I think he's gonna be a top G soon. Which Ecuador, it's been on a.
Yeah.
It's been, you know, on the
But I
same
was saying in
situation.
Latin America, there's been this revival of like the right coming
Mhm.
back into
Right.
the scene, and people are adjusting and switching their focus from these super liberal points in our Latin American
You see,
countries.
Latin America kind of always does this, right? Like they kind of go because for example, you have Milei coming, but then you had Brazil like Lula da Silva again, like
And they're trying to get it out.
and they're trying to get him out, but
Yeah.
but Lula da Silva has so much power, for example, and then you have countries in Central America like López Obrador, who López Obrador leans a lot to the left, but he's one of those that leans to the left and then does the right policy. It's like he
Yeah.
plays politics, right? And again, going back to the movement in Latin America, the movement in Latin America affects the immigration in the U.S. directly. It's like whoever gets elected, like when Petro got elected in Colombia, for example, we saw a spike of people from Colombia wanting to migrate. Like, this is, but Colombia is known to be a very conservative country.
Yeah.
It's very similar to the Dominican Republic. They have a very conservative base. And for example, my opinion is like Petro is going to be there, and then they're going to go back to conservative. I felt like that was one of the countries where like Federico should have been the guy to get elected, but he didn't. And I think his youth kind of backfired him, and he's gonna get elected. But you see how Central and Latin American elections matter also in the U.S. So I think part of the focus of the U.S. is to also make sure to help governments move their democracy,
Yeah.
and not every lefty tendency government has been bad. Look, like you also have in you have in Chile, Boric. He has a lot of progressive ideas, and he's been very favored. But then you had Pedro Castillo in Peru, who he was like a complete mess.
Yeah.
So you have mess, you have good.
Latin America's everywhere.
Right, and then lastly you had where people I guess fear sometimes Bukele. I to me, top G, right, too.
Mhm.
But you had in what was it, Chile? You had Pinochet.
Mhm.
When you had Pinochet, and you get someone who's so strong on power. And my country, we had Trujillo. You had some of these guys that were super
Most
strong,
authoritarian.
very authoritarian, and that gets to another extreme. So that's where I think a lot of
It's a balancing game.
because in Latin America, you have these things where, like, if you go to the left, you go to the left. If you go to the
right,
right,
it's too far
you
right.
go too far right.
These boys
You
go
can't
too extreme. There's
you
no
can't
real
You
middle.
can't do a middle, and that's always hurting Latin American countries. That's always been their Achilles. So, I mean, I'll tell you this: I think there's a progressive move, and there's a clash right now, right?
Yeah.
Between the Borics of the world and Lula da Silva's, and then you have the Mileis and
Yeah, the
you need
political
both.
spectrum.
Yeah, you need both. You need a balance, and luckily, I feel like I'm trying not to be biased here, but I feel like everyone should be kind of like the Dominican Republic. Like,
Okay.
they ask them like, okay, are you a left or a right? And they're like, welcome to the DR. They don't really say it. They don't care.
Yeah.
Like their base is
I
very
get what you're
conservative.
saying. Like, it's really more issue based,
Mhm.
and you could be whatever you want to be,
Right.
as long as tú me resuelves.
Right. That's what, and come to
Yeah.
DR, and which is
I put extra onions on my tres golpe.
yeah, and they're like, here, visit us, and that's why we're number 2 now, most visited country in Latin America. Like they don't care. They don't really get involved in politics. So if you're based on tourism, you cannot be. So going back, all that benefits the U.S. It decreases necessary immigration because people don't want to. The American dream is beautiful, but not everybody wants to migrate. Some people are comfortable in their country. Some people make money. Some people are successful.
And
some
happy
people
staying
live a
where they're-
great life. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Latin America, and I love being in Latin America. So you can.
I thought you were Colombian.
Nah,
I thought you was Colombian.
No. Or I love when I Colombia, Dominican, Mexico. I love going to these places.
Yeah.
And realistically, when you see that the effect of how things could be solved comes from within, and that's what El Salvador has done very great, working from within. And you're gonna see the numbers from people
Because
migrating.
now the migration out of El Salvador is dropped
Right,
down.
and look,
you fixed it.
Right, exactly. So your resources, and like retrospect, maybe contrary to that, Venezuela, which had over 7.5 million people migrate.
All that instability,
in the past,
todo eso, claro.
past 10 years,
And a lot of them go to Colombia, and that's what's crazy because me and my lady went to Medellin last year.
Over 1 million.
And the amount of Venezuelan immigrants, and a lot of them natives.
Yeah.
A lot of like natives, Indio.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really sad to see kind of like how they are treated as almost a second-class citizen out there. For real.
No, and everywhere. And like growing up, especially focusing a lot in the Venezuelan community, growing up, I remember seeing the Venezuelan community coming to the U.S. was like the highest class of all. Like I'm telling you, like the richest. And
because they had a lot of resources back there with all the oil. And
but also what happens that who kept migrating later on was maybe the working class. And the
political instability. If you're going to persecute me, kidnap my family because I don't agree with you.
And then they start migrating. They start going to Colombia, Peru, Chile, Dominican Republic, Panama. They start going to all these places nearby. And it creates an instability for those countries. And then later on moves on to create more instability into the U.S. So if you can regulate countries that are migrating, and I want to say maybe the closer countries, like Mexico, Guatemala, and these other countries, if you could, because Mexico is not migrating as much as they used to. Their economy is actually more stable nowadays. But, if you can control that, if you can regulate that, you can actually help the crisis. You can actually ameliorate the damage. You can actually lower, the process, slow down the process of people. Because if you make things comfortable at home, you're not going to want to leave.
So, Arturo, in closing, what would you recommend anybody who's thinking of migrating to the United States? What should they prepare for? What do they need to have? What should they not do?
First of all, I'll tell you what they shouldn't do. They shouldn't come here crossing the border illegally. I think that's one of the toughest things. I think that's extremely tough for an individual to do, a very daunting experience with coyotes and stuff. I would avoid that 100%. I know that it's hard for me to say do the proper way, because a proper way is extremely subjective. Like, what is a proper way? Get a visa, come in as a tourist, and then do a process. No, actually get acquainted and get an understanding of what it is that you're trying to do. You're trying to come to the U.S. You know that there's a likelihood that you have to go through this process, spend all this money. You have to have a realization of what you're doing. If you're comfortable back home, stay home. You might use your resources better staying over there. Now, if your plan is to actually come to, you're like, no, I'm gonna go to the U.S. and do that because it's fair. We did it. We all did it. So it's fair that everyone has a fair shot. Then the first process I would first recommend is maybe taking a look at USCIS. You can even Google some of this information via USCIS and seeing the type of visas and processes that they could do. If there's a family petition, or if there's, perhaps their family has some type of business, or they want to come to school here, and they could do it legally already from the time they walk in. So if they don't have a tourist visa, which they could come and then do some type of process here. If they're back home, they could do a process over there and just kind of come here and just do everything properly from the beginning. I think that's the best thing. And just to have an understanding, a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to go to the U.S. and do all this amazing things. Yeah, it was tough for me, which I was legal and had everything, to get to where I am now. Yeah. Imagínate, if you're coming, no papers, no nothing, no family, no type of assistance. It's expensive, man. It's the world, the U.S. When you trade pesos for dollars, doesn't matter what pesos, whether Colombian or Peruvian soles or peso Dominican, it's expensive. Yeah. So you don't want to come here waste and expend resources. And if you and of course, if you are gonna do it, make sure you do it with someone who understands the laws and and all the regulations. No te pongo a inventar tú solo. No te pongo a inventar tú solo. Like that, a lot of people do that, and then they're like, "Oh, I don't know what to do. I need some help." They
filled the wrong form. They said the wrong thing, and then they pull
I'm
up
like, I could have helped and could have done it right, which I've had many people, and now I can't do anything. So do it the right way, right? And when I mean the right way, get the proper help that you need, the proper need that you need.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're thinking of moving to the United States, si tú crees que tú necesitas venir para los Estados Unidos,
you give me a call. Arturo, I'll help you out. Okay, the Miami lawyer.
Yeah, Arturo, thank you so much, bro.
Have a good one.